There was this preacher back in Russia who considered himself a great philosopher. He was a legend in his own mind. And he would go around from shtetl to shtetl delivering these philosophical lectures to simple farming people. So naturally they all fell asleep. But he would go from town to town and he would deliver his lectures. One time he comes to a town and he's giving his lecture. Everybody falls asleep except for one guy who's looking at him very intently. And at one point in his lecture, he sees this guy going like this. He said, finally, somebody is listening, somebody is agreeing with me. But after a few moments, the guy is going like this. So he thinks, oh, he doesn't agree with me. So he brought more arguments and he explained it better and he tried harder. And after a while, the guy's going like this. And this went on back and forth. He would say no, and he would explain it better. And then the guy would say, nod yes. So, of course, the lecture went on for hours. Finally, when he finishes his lecture, he goes over to the guy and he says, so tell me, in the end, did you agree with me or not? The guy says, look, I'm a simple farmer. I didn't understand a word you said. He said, then what were you making with your head? He says, last week, my best goat disappeared. And when you were standing at a certain angle, you looked like my goat. But then you turned the other way, and I thought, no. But when you turned back, I thought, yeah, that's my goat. So he says, I finally came to the conclusion, you're certainly a goat, but not mine. When we get together, a whole community of Jews, we gotta accomplish something, we gotta say something, we gotta learn something meaningful, something real, something true, something holy, something without an echo. Otherwise, it comes across like a goat. So let's learn something very important, very real, and very true. What does the Torah tell us about life that we can understand and appreciate? Now, there's an expression that everybody uses that causes great confusion. The expression life after death. And people say, do you believe in life after death? And people are stunned. That sounds like a very deep question. And, we're not so philosophical. Do you believe in life after death? The expression is wrong, misleading, and confusing. What does it mean, life after death? What are you talking about? Are you asking me whether something that has died is alive? That's nonsense. If it died, then it's not alive. Because if it was alive, then it didn't die. So what does it mean, is there life after death? A human being is defined in Torah as a creature with a body and a soul. Because in the story of creation, it says God formed a body and then breathed into it a soul, and it was a man, a mensch. So what is a mensch? Not a body alone, and not a soul alone, but a body with a soul, or a soul in a body. Every life has a certain span. Every person is given a certain number of years. When those years are up, the soul and the body go their separate ways. They each return to their natural habitat. And that is the expression from dust to dust. The body goes back to the ground because that's where it came from. It was made from the earth, and it goes back to the earth. The soul goes back to where souls come from, wherever that is. When the soul and the body separate, we call that death. But what actually happened when the body and soul separate? The body is not a living thing. By its very nature, it is earth. It's not a living thing. It only lives because the soul gives it life. The soul, on the other hand, is a living thing. It is alive. So when we ask the question, is there life after death? What are we talking about? Are we talking about the body, or are we talking about the soul? Either way, the question makes no sense. Because if you're talking about the body, and you're asking, is the body alive after it dies? Not a very good question. Of course not. If you're asking, is the soul alive after it leaves the body? That's not a good question either. Because, of course, yes. A living thing can't die. Life can't die. It's just a logical, necessary assumption. Life can't die. Death can't live. So is there life after death? What does that mean? What's alive is always alive. Not after death, always. So the only real question, the only logical question should be, where does life go when it leaves the body? That's a good question. And I don't know the answer. That's what makes it a good question. But is there life when it leaves the body? The soul is more alive when it leaves the body. Because while it's in the body, it has to schlep this thing around. It's like a locomotive. Can a locomotive move when it's disconnected from the 300 cars? Can it move? Yes, it can move a lot easier. So the soul is a locomotive. The body is like the cars, the caboose. So for 120 years, the locomotive schleps this body around and gives it life. When it separates from the body, it becomes more alive. What does life mean? Life means feelings. Life means knowledge. Life means sensitivity. How much knowledge can a soul have when it has to work through a little brain? It's limited. How much sensitivity can the soul experience when it has to experience it through an insensitive body? It's limited. How much emotion can a soul feel when it has to do it through a human heart? It's limited. And that's why there were times in the olden days when people would die from excitement, from heartbreak. Why? Because the heart couldn't take it. The soul was feeling more than the heart could take. But when the soul is not attached to the body, it feels those same feelings more intensely. It understands what it had studied or what it had thought more deeply. It's now free to live without restrictions. So when people say, God forbid a husband dies leaving a wife, or a wife dies leaving a husband, does the soul in heaven still feel, care, know? The answer is, what do you mean still? Now it really feels. If it could feel love or compassion or devotion through a human heart that is only so big, imagine how much love it feels now that it's not restricted to that little heart. And it doesn't have to worry about whether the heart can take it. Now it can really feel. So it's hard for us to imagine how much emotion is a soul capable of when it is not restricted by the human heart. How much knowledge and understanding is a soul capable of when it doesn't have to work through the little brain? How much does the soul see when it doesn't have to see through eyes? How much does it hear when it doesn't have to hear through the ears? So is the soul still alive? Not still alive. Now it is fully alive. I'll tell you an interesting story. We have this seminar for women, Beis Chana. It's 30 years now, more than 30 years. Women come during vacation times from college, from work, from all over the world, for a couple of weeks, for a month, to get a crash course on Judaism. You know how life is strange? There are women who come from Israel to St. Paul, Minnesota, to study Judaism. One year, many years ago, a girl came to Beis Chana. She was 16. Her mother begged her to come because from the time she was 13, she had told her parents that she wants to be a Mormon. You know what is a Mormon? This girl grew up in Brooklyn. She went to a day school all her life. When she was 13, she decided she wants to be a Mormon. She told her mother, the mother says, "What's a Mormon?" She had no idea what that was. At first they thought they would pass. They took it to a psychiatrist eventually. They had the grandfather come flying in to talk to her, the rabbi of the shul, the principal of the day school. Gar nicht geholfen. She wants to be a Mormon. Finally, when she was 16, she tells her parents she's going to Utah because she has to be a Mormon. So the parents prevailed on her to make a stop in Minneapolis, and it's on the way. So she did them a favor and she stopped off in Minneapolis. I tried to talk to her. There was no chance. I said, "Why are you going to Utah?" She says, "I'm going to find out if they have the truth." I said, "How are you going to know if they have the truth? Are you going to ask them? Do you have the truth? That's how you're going to find out. What do you know about truth? What are you going?" She said, "I just have to go." And there was no talking to her. Fine. Next morning, she goes down to the office, and she's on the telephone with the airline, making arrangements to continue her journey to Utah. But the secretary of the Chabad house was on the other line talking to a Baptist, Northern Baptist, to a church group who were coming to the Chabad house for a lecture. This girl hears this and she says to the secretary, "They're coming to Chabad house for a lecture?" The secretary says, "Yeah." The girl said, "Why?" And the secretary, who wasn't Jewish, says, "To learn, I guess." Anyway, the girl got very curious and she said, "Wait, I got to see this." So she canceled her flight and she stayed 2 extra days. And a group of ministers, so I get invited to speak there at their seminary for the graduating class. A year after they graduate, and they've been out in the field for a year, they come back for a retreat, and part of the program is that they come to the Chabad house, first-year ministers. So about 30 ministers come to the Chabad house, And the students of Beis Chana, the Jewish women, are sitting around the walls, the periphery of the room, and there are 30 ministers in the center of the room. And I'm familiar with the routine. They came to ask questions about Judaism, but really, they want to know what I think about their religion. That's really why they come. About their religion. So they ask me 2 or 3 questions about Judaism, and then they start asking me questions about their religion. So I was familiar with this, I wasn't surprised. But all these women from all over the world, they couldn't believe it. They're all sitting there, and when it comes to the questions, one of the ministers said, what are the different types of labor you're not allowed to perform on Shabbos? We talked about that for a while. Then somebody said, what is this holiday Lag BaOmer? They had done their homework. We talked about that for a few minutes. And then it began. Question. Do you believe in heaven and hell? I said, of course. When the soul leaves the body, it goes back to where souls come from. Now, a soul that comes back to the world of souls, and it still looks like a soul, and it still smells like a soul, well, it just picks up where it left off, and it fits right in, and it's paradise. But a soul comes back after 100 years on earth, and it kind of smells like a body, not like a soul. It's got an earthy smell to it. Well, that's very embarrassing, and that's hell. The burning of hell is the burning with shame, not a physical fire. A soul is ashamed because it doesn't smell like a soul. And so it goes through hell until that smell wears off. Then it's in paradise. And that smell can only last up to a maximum of 12 months. That's why we say Kaddish for 11 months. Because why do you think my relative needed the whole 12 months? So we say for 11 months, just in case. But we don't want to make it look bad and say the whole 12 months. So we say for 11 months out of respect for the soul. And to believe that hell goes on forever is not kosher, it's not allowed, it's idolatry. Because evil cannot go on forever. Only good is eternal, not evil. Now, of course, this is not what they're taught, and this is not what they believe, but they're very glad to hear it. Because eternal damnation is a very painful, difficult concept. So nobody objected. They went on to the next question. And these Jewish women are sitting around and saying, wait a minute, why don't they argue? Next question. Do you believe in the resurrection? I said, of course. After Mashiach comes, every soul will come back into its body. That's the ultimate perfection of the world. Souls don't stay in heaven forever. They come back to earth for a very simple reason. The reward that the soul receives in heaven is for the mitzvahs it performed while it was on earth. Right? But to perform a mitzvah, you have to have a body. So the soul could not perform the mitzvah without the body. So why is it getting all the reward? Does that make sense? To be rewarded properly, the body has to share in the reward, because the body shared in the mitzvah. And that's why ultimately the true reward is when the soul comes back into the body and together they are rewarded with a perfect world. This is not what they're taught. But nobody objected. Next question. Do you believe in Satan? I said, of course. Satan is an angel. An angel means a messenger. A messenger has no agenda of his own. He's an angel. He does what God tells him to do, and that's all he cares about, and that's all he knows. To do what God told him to do. Unfortunately, Satan gets to do all the dirty work. Gets all the dirty jobs. But to think that Satan has some kind of an agenda and he's at war with God, that's Greek mythology. You're not allowed to believe that. No objections. Next question. Do you believe in the Messiah? I said, of course. Mashiach is a descendant of King David. He will inspire the world, bring peace to the world. But it's not a matter of believing. Just to believe that someday there will be a Messiah. The sooner we get back to keeping all the commandments, the sooner he will come. Of course, this is not what they're told. But a guy raises his hand, that's sitting right in front of me, a minister, raises his hand, and he says, is there anything we can do to help? This girl who was on her way to Omaha, who was on her way to Utah, she had been sitting at the edge of her seat, literally, physically. When this guy said, is there anything we can do to help? She leaned forward a little bit and the chair toppled over. Literally, she fell out of her chair. The session was over and she comes over to me and she says, I'm not going to Utah. What's the point? They'll bring me here for an afternoon to find out what I might as well stay here. Do we believe in resurrection? It's not a matter of belief. Just like life continues logically and necessarily because a living thing can't die, the same is true with resurrection. It's necessary morally to assume that the body will be rewarded with the soul. So it's not just a matter of believing in some strange event that's going to happen. It's part of our morality. You don't reward the soul without the body if it couldn't do the mitzvah without the body. And since God is just, how could he not reward the body? So if we don't believe in resurrection, then we're basically saying that God is not just, that there is no justice. The body deserves a reward. In fact, the body deserves more of a reward than a soul, because a soul is a godly thing. It loves doing mitzvahs. So why does it deserve such a reward? It's only doing what it loves. But the body hates doing mitzvahs. Body hates doing anything. So when a body does a mitzvah, it really deserves a reward. And to not reward the body, that's just not nice. And God is nice. And so we believe in the resurrection of every Jewish soul and every righteous Gentile because it's only right. It wouldn't be right any other way. Now, the process of birth and death is explained very, very graphically in Torah and in Kabbalah. By the way, Kabbalah, I mean real Kabbalah, not the stuff Madonna dabbles in. Real Kabbalah is simply a section of Torah. Only it's the mystical section. So in the Torah it says that birth and death come in stages. They don't happen suddenly. How does birth happen? 40 days before conception, the angel announces that there's going to be a conception and a birth. It announces how long this soul is going to be in the body. It announces the type of life it's going to have. It announces who you're going to marry. That's before you're conceived. You're already married. Then it's just a question of finding him or her. That is the beginning of the birth process. Here's a very interesting thing. If you look in the stories in the Torah, like for example, the birth of Isaac, the angel came to Sarah and said, "This time next year, you will have a son." The obvious question is, it doesn't take a year. Why is it always this time next year? 9 months is all it takes. It doesn't. The pregnancy takes 9 months. But before conception, the soul has to get used to the idea that it's going to come down into a body, into this world, and it has to adjust. It needs a little time to orient itself. It would be too shocking for conception to happen without warning. So it literally does take 12 months for a soul to be born. So we've all been here before. We're old hands at this. So when the resurrection happens, which body is our soul going to come back to? Some suggest that you get to pick the best parts of each body. Like a Mr. Potato Head, you can kind of... Every body did a mitzvah, so every body has to be rewarded. So which body will the soul come back into? All of them. They were all good. A soul can have more than one body. One soul can give life to many bodies. This explains a fascinating statement in the Medrash. The Medrash makes the following observation. If you look in the verse in the Torah, it says, "And the days drew near," or it drew near the days for Yaakov to die, which literally means he was close to death. But the Medrash takes it very literally and says, the days were going to die? That's what it sounds like if you translate it literally. It's like, the days were going to die. Yaakov's days were going to die. So the Medrash says, the days are going to die? And it answers the question. It says, that's right. Yaakov doesn't die, just the days die. You run out of days. You don't run out of life. So we really don't die. Our time is up. The time ran out, not the soul, not the life, but the time that the soul was supposed to spend on earth, that ran out. That's a very Jewish and correct understanding of life and death. But I want to end with another incredible story. Personal experience. It was back in the 70s. I was in New York visiting. And I went up to one of the offices, the Rebbe's offices, the Rebbe's secretaries. And I found out that for the first time in about 30 years, they're rearranging the office. They still had dial phones, you know? But they were, for some reason, they were redecorating the office or something. So I pitched in and we were schlepping file cabinets around and moving desks. And as we're rolling this one cabinet, file cabinet, a file had slipped out of the drawer and was between the drawers. And when we leaned the cabinet forward, the file fell out. We picked it up. It was a manila file folder, and it had one letter in it, dated 1957. We read it. It was a letter to the Rebbe from a Dr. Jacobson, who lived in Manhattan. In the letter, Dr. Jacobson writes to the Rebbe, a terrible thing happened. A friend of mine, a Mr. Shapiro, a wealthy man, wanted to fulfill the mitzvah of writing a Torah. And so he hired a scribe, and he authorized him to write a new Torah scroll. The custom is that just before you finish the last line of the new Torah, you make a party, you invite a lot of people. It's the celebration of the conclusion of a Torah scroll. And then at the party, you fill in those last letters, and there's a big celebration. Mr. Shapiro asked Dr. Jacobson if the party could be held in Dr. Jacobson's apartment because it was larger than Mr. Shapiro's. And so there was a party. It was a great celebration, and at the party, there was a woman there, a single woman, young woman, who, it doesn't say in the letter, but she must have had an aneurysm, and all the doctors who were there could not help her, and she died at the party in Dr. Jacobson's apartment. Now, Dr. Jacobson writes to the Rebbe, my faith is fine. I have no questions, I have no problems. But people are asking me how do you explain this? A woman comes to a party celebrating Torah and dies? Where's the justice? Now, you know, of course, when a person says, I have no problem, but a friend of mine, you know already what that means, right? Some guy once came to a Rebbe and said, Rebbe, a friend of mine asked me to find out, how do you repent for committing adultery? So the Rebbe said, why didn't your friend come to ask himself? He said, well, he's embarrassed. He said, he doesn't have to be embarrassed. He can come and tell me that he has a friend. So the man admitted that it was him. So Dr. Jacobson says, I have no problem, but I have a friend, students particularly, who are asking me to explain how such a thing can happen. What should I tell them? And then as a giveaway, he says, and my second question is, why did it happen in my house? The way that Rebbe answered most letters is that he would write his answer in the margin of your letter. That way you save paper and you save time, and it's... So the Rebbe's answer was written in the margins of Dr. Jacobson's letter, right there. So after we finish reading Dr. Jacobson's letter, we read the Rebbe's answer. The Rebbe writes it out, and then the secretary types it up and mails it out. But here was the answer, and it's written very briefly, A, B, C, points. Here is the Rebbe's answer. A, why do human beings think that they can understand God? B, God asks us to try to understand Him, so let's try. C, when a person is born, there is an announcement made by the angel that says how long that person is going to live. With very rare exceptions, the person lives exactly that amount of years to the day. If you do something so horrendous, so unthinkable, it could shorten the life, but that's very unusual. And if you do something so stupendous, so meritorious, it could lengthen your life, but that's rare. Generally, we live out the life we were given. What are we up to? D. When the time comes and the person is finished with his life, death can happen in so many different ways. It can happen in very unpleasant circumstances, like a person alone in the streets. It can happen in a hospital where you have at least some caring doctors, some people who are interested, sensitive. It can happen with your family standing around. Different ways. Point E. Every detail of a person's last minutes in life are unimaginably meaningful. Your last breaths, of course, everything that's going on around you is very meaningful. Next point. You cannot imagine, the Rebbe says, how meaningful is it to a Jewish girl who is breathing her last and cannot speak? How meaningful is it that she knows that she is breathing her last? Your last breaths, of course, everything that's going on around you is very meaningful. Next point. You cannot imagine, the Rebbe says, how meaningful is it to a Jewish girl who is breathing her last and cannot speak? How meaningful is it that she knows that she is breathing her last breaths in a room that has a mezuzah on the door, and in the mezuzah it says, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, which is what you're supposed to say before you die. But she couldn't say it. So knowing that it's in the mezuzah, and that she's in a room that has a mezuzah, how meaningful is that? And how meaningful is it to know that her life is concluding together with the conclusion of a Torah? So what should you tell the people who are asking you? You should tell them that they just witnessed an incredible example of divine planning. In fact, the Rebbe says, according to the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov, why did Mr. Shapiro suddenly decide to write a Torah? For this girl. It was her merit. There were 4 of us sitting in the office. We read this letter and we were stunned. I mean, the clarity of the vision, that holy way of looking at things, the beauty of the way that Rebbe explained, we were just marveling. And suddenly the phone rings. The story is not over. The phone rings. It's a rabbi from a big city in the Midwest. He says, please get a message to the Rebbe. I am in the middle of a bar mitzvah of my oldest son, and my father came from Israel to celebrate the bar mitzvah. We're right in the middle of the celebration. My father just collapsed and died from a heart attack. What should I do? We're in the middle of a bar mitzvah. What should I tell the people? We looked at each other and said, boy, do we have an answer for you. We read him the letter. What greater merit for a grandfather than to be in his last moments at the bar mitzvah of his grandson? This is not a tragedy, this is such a schus. So he ran back to the bar mitzvah hall and he read the whole thing. We dictated it to him because there were no faxes in those days. We dictated it to him and he read it to the people and the bar mitzvah went on. Now we looked at each other and we said, wait a minute. Who decided to move furniture around all of a sudden? Why? And you know, they never finished. They never finished moving that furniture. That's it. That was the end of the movement of the furniture. Because there really was no reason for rearranging the office other than to find that letter. On that day, when this rabbi would call and say, what should I tell people? My father just died at a bar mitzvah. When we take these principles together, the ancient wisdom of Judaism, everything happens by divine plan. Satan doesn't make anything happen. He's an angel. Everything happens according to God's plan. And God's plan is always perfect and it's always for the good. If we could understand God, if we had holy eyes so that we could see holiness, we wouldn't have any questions at all. But God doesn't let us see. He wants us to figure it out. Because that way we appreciate Him so much more. If we just saw it, we would get used to it. That's why it's so important, this ancient Jewish custom, to say, Baruch Hashem. Thank God. It sounds like such meaningless, simple words, but it's not. It's a whole approach to life when you say, thank God. Something happens, you say, thank God. What does that mean? It means I know who runs this world. I know there's a divine plan. I know there is justice in this world. I know that everything happens for the good. And therefore, when something happens, my response is, Baruch Hashem. Thank God. And before it happens, God willing. If it's in God's plan, then it will happen. God willing. Simple words, but so meaningful. Let's wish each other. Let's offer good wishes and blessings. We should all appreciate the beauty, the greatness, the holiness of life. Because if we don't, then we will not grieve the loss of life. The more we appreciate life, the more we reject death. We don't get used to it. We don't accept it. We don't become tolerant of it. We want to live. Choose life, God says. Which is why we say l'chaim, to life. Because we want life, we appreciate life, we see the beauty of it, the holiness of it. Even when we say Mazel Tov, it's not just an expression. It's full of meaning. It's full of life. So let's celebrate life. And let's celebrate our Jewish wisdom. We're forgetting, and that's a tragedy. We have the greatest wisdom in the world. There's nothing like the wisdom of Judaism. I mean, we see it now. Some people claim to believe in God, and as a result, they blow themselves up with others. Yeah. We need the wisdom of Judaism more than ever. We have become proud to be Jewish. Now we need to become proud of our Jewishness. Proud of our mitzvahs, proud of our customs, proud of our tradition and our heritage. It's the Torah that makes us great. Let's celebrate it. Let's do it. And let's do it with a passion and with joy and with appreciation and with wisdom. There is so much to learn. And it's so pleasant to do the learning. So I want to tell you that the fact that you're sitting here tonight, you're so humble, you probably think there's nothing special. That you're not special for being here tonight. But that's not true. I don't want it to go to your head, so I'll keep it short. The fact that you're sitting here tonight is the greatest miracle the world has ever seen. The fact that Jews are Jewish today, 3,000 years after God spoke to us for the first and last time, and said, "Be Jews." And we said, okay. We had no idea what we were in for. We had no idea that God would not talk to us again for 3,000 years. We had no idea that it was going to be 3,000 miserable years. We thought we'd be at the top of the world. No, we're not. 3,000 years has gone by since God asked us to be the Jewish people. And we've suffered. And we're Jewish. You stop and think about it even for a minute. This is not possible. It isn't possible. How can you still be Jewish 3,000 years later? And why would you want to be? What is wrong with you? Why do you call yourself a Jew, and why do you come running when you hear there's a Jewish program happening? What is with you? It's a miracle. You are so Jewish. You are so incredibly Jewish, and you don't even realize it. You don't even realize it. And you think, see, ask the average Jew, do you consider yourself a good Jew? I'm not talking about political people. The average Jew. Stop the average Jew anywhere in the world and say, do you consider yourself a good Jew? Nobody is going to say yes. We're all lousy Jews. Because everybody will tell you, me? I'm a good Jew? Compared to my grandmother, I'm nothing. Compared to my grandfather from my mother's side, that was a tzaddik. I'm nothing. Everybody says that. Whether you are Orthodox, conservative, or Reform, everybody says the same thing. What, me, a good Jew? There used to be some good Jews now, not me. Now, that may be true, but it doesn't change the fact that we are unbelievably Jewish. There's a rabbi in Israel who did a class in Talmud. He's a brilliant man in all the sciences and in all of Torah. So all the professors come to the class. It's been going on for 15 years. But there was one professor who refused to come. He was invited, would not come to the class. One day the rabbi meets this professor at a party somewhere. And he says to him, how come you don't come to the class? All your colleagues come. They love it. It's interesting. It's in your building. Come, you'll enjoy. This professor says, I do not belong at a Talmud class. The rabbi says, why not? He says, because you and me, we have nothing in common. So the rabbi said, what are you saying? How can you say such a thing? He says, since the day I arrived in Israel, I eat pork on Shabbos. He came out of the war, he was upset. I eat pork every Shabbos. The rabbi said, only on Shabbos? He says, yeah, dafke on Shabbos. In spite. So the rabbi says, well, in that case, we do have something in common. He says, what? He said, we both celebrate Shabbos. I celebrate Shabbos in an old-fashioned way, and you celebrate Shabbos in an original. The professor started coming to the class. And he told his colleagues why he's coming to the class. He says, that rabbi is very smart. I heard what he said to me. It wasn't just a joke. You hear what he said to me? He said to me like this, why do you eat pork? Because you're angry at God for the Holocaust. So how do you get back at God? You do the most outrageous, un-Jewish thing you can think of. What is the most un-Jewish thing a person can think of? To eat pork. Because everybody knows a Jew doesn't eat pork. But it didn't feel like it was enough of a punishment. So you thought to yourself, how can I punish God a little more? So you thought, not on Tuesday or Wednesday. I'm going to eat pork on Shabbos. That feels more like a punishment. So the rabbi was basically saying to me, you think you're not Jewish? You think we have nothing in common? You don't belong at a Talmud class? Listen to yourself. First of all, you believe in God. Otherwise, who are you angry at? Secondly, you believe that God gave the Torah. Otherwise, how do you know you're not allowed to eat pork? Thirdly, you know that Shabbos is a special day for God. Otherwise, why is that a bigger punishment? So you believe in God, you believe in the Torah, you believe that God runs the world and should have stopped the Holocaust, and you believe that Shabbos is a holy day. Listen to yourself, you're Orthodox. One more mitzvah, you're ultra. He says, and here I thought I wasn't Jewish anymore. We are an incredible people. And it doesn't, you can tell others also. It won't do any harm. We are an incredible people. And we take no credit for it. The fact that a Jew today says, yes, I'm Jewish, for that he deserves every reward in the world. Every blessing in the world he has just earned himself. If after 3,000 miserable years of suffering, you say you're Jewish, you're a hero. And you don't even think so. You think, nah, I'm a lousy Jew. We are incredible. God got a real bargain when he picked us. He probably didn't even expect us to last this long. On the other hand, what a compliment. If I was God, if I was God and I gathered a people at the foot of Mount Sinai and I wanted them to be my people and be Jewish and observe the mitzvahs, I would talk to them every day. No, are you doing it? I'd be such a nudnik. Okay, maybe not every day. How about once in 1,000 years? Doesn't he feel any need to come back and repeat himself? No? Not even once in 1,000 years? He lets 3,000 years go by and he says, yeah, they'll be Jewish. Isn't that a compliment? I called my children together one day. I thought, let me try this. I called them together and I said, listen carefully because I'm not going to repeat myself for 1,000 years. No fighting in the house. Garnish geholfen. But God tells us, be my people, be Jewish, keep mitzvahs, and then doesn't say it again for 3,000 years? Miserable years? And he's confident that we're still going to be Jewish? Boy, he's got a lot of confidence in us. And he's right. Because look, we're here. You're sitting here. It's not Shabbos, it's not Yom Kippur. You think it's Yom Kippur? No, it's not. It's Erev Pesach, by the way. And you come out here, why? Because you want to know about what? Community health? No, that's not what you came here because you're Jewish. And you heard something Jewish going on. You don't care whether it's about mental health, mental unhealth. You don't, as long as it's a Jewish program, you come running. Why? Because 3,000 years ago, your great-grandparents stood at Mount Sinai and God said, be my people. And we said, sure. We are really amazing people. Daniel Pearl, there's a movie being made of him, of his life now. Is that not a tzaddik? Is that not a hero? Why? What did he have to say? I'm Jewish, my father's Jewish, my mother's Jewish. What's his problem? His problem is he is insanely Jewish. He's a tzaddik. And we're all like that. And we don't even take credit. Say, nah, my grandfather was a good Jew. We are not good Jews, but we are great Jews. And therefore we deserve that after 3,000 years since Mount Sinai, we deserve that the world should become perfect the way God envisioned it. People should become good. God's will should prevail. The world should be as He wants it to be. Mashiach should come and catch us sitting here on a Sunday evening being Jewish for no reason at all. That's my phone. So let Mashiach come and catch us here being just Jewish, just plain Jewish. And let the world finally become good. And let them all come to learn. And we will be nice to them even though they haven't been nice to us. And we will gladly share our wisdom with them and teach them whatever they want to know. And then we will have a beautiful world, and all the souls in heaven who are impatiently waiting to come back will finally be able to come back and will be reunited with all of our loved ones and with all of our ancestors, the entire Jewish people, not just a generation, but all the generations of Jews together on earth forever in a perfect world under the leadership of Mashiach. May he come speedily, quickly, right now, before we all go home and mess up this perfect evening. Thank you very much. Shalom Aleichem. How are you? You know, I do a lot of talking, a lot of Zooming, many classes, many subjects, but that's all formal stuff. Hopefully good stuff, but formal. We also have a Wednesday night meeting that's more informal and kind of Hamish. If you want to join us for that kind of an event, interactive, time for questions and so on. If you want to join us for this side of conversation, click on the link below and join us every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock. Well, maybe not every Wednesday night, but we try to make it every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock, a more informal chat, which can be more enjoyable at times than the formal stuff. So check it out. Click on the link and join us. Try it, you'll like it. I can imagine saying to my grandson, you have to be careful not to eat a non-kosher candy. You have to be Shomer Shabbos. You have to keep kosher. You have to be honest. You have to honor your parents. You have to get good grades. You have to go to yeshiva. You have to get in time to the minyan. And I can imagine my grandson saying, I thought about it, and actually, I don't need any of that. You keep telling me I need to, and I really don't. I don't need to. Why do I need to? And if I was religious, what would I say? Oh yes, you have to. You know what happens to people who sin. Oh, so now I'm bullying him. Now I'm trying to scare him into behaving. This is not Judaism. That's religion. Religion says you are obligated, you must, you have to. What's going to be with you? Get your act together. Be a mensch. It used to work. It's not working. Not only religion. Society. Every child is told, got to go to school. You have to go to school. You have to get good grades. You have to get a job. You have to get a house. And then you have to pay the mortgage. And the taxes. And the insurance. And you know what people are saying today? Took a long time, but they finally came up with it. You know, there's this guy who was suing his parents for giving birth to him without his consent. I think he's got a good case. You didn't ask me. You went ahead and gave birth to me, and now I have to pay the mortgage? How did that happen? You gave birth to me, you paid a mortgage. You know, that kind of makes sense. As scary as it sounds, it really makes sense. I didn't ask for this. You made me, so you pay for me. Doesn't that make sense? Anyway, the case was thrown out. Now, this is real. Both his parents are lawyers. He didn't have a chance. But they threw it out of court because the parents said, we were trying to consult with you, we couldn't find you. But now you're hearing it even from young children, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds. You tell them to put a book away or to put their shoes away, and their answer is, I didn't ask to be born. Of course, parents panic, rush the kid off to therapy, and put him on medication for anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts. If your child or grandchild ever says to you, I didn't ask to be born, don't give him medicine. Tell him, neither did I. Because it's true, you didn't ask to be born. And you know why you didn't ask to be born? Because you don't need to be. If you needed, you would have asked. You don't need to be. Isn't that a shocking thought? Doesn't it sound a little suicidal? You don't need to be here. You don't need to be born. You didn't ask to be born. If you were asked, you would have said, no thanks. I need this like a hole in the head. So look at what's going on. Your parents tell you you have to. You have to. What's going to be with you? Get your act together. Get a life. get a job, grow up. You have to. Then you listen to the commercials. Things you never heard of, you have to have. You have to. You don't have one of those? Medications. Do you sometimes feel a little something in the back of your throat? Well, you need this medicine. Order now. It might kill you, but it'll take away that. Really, they go through 5 minutes of warnings. This may make you blind, it may make you dizzy, it may give you a stroke And after 5 minutes of that, they say, so what are you waiting for? Order now. Order now will send you a month's worth for free. Because my reaction is, if a month's worth is not enough, this is not a good medicine. At any rate, the commercials all tell you what you need. You need. So you figure, okay, I'll go for therapy. You know what happens when you go for therapy? You come in and you say, I need help with my anxiety. Can you help me with my anxiety? And the therapist says, you think you're suffering from anxiety? Your mother never wanted you. You hate your brother. It's eating you up. So you need much more than you think you need. I said, oh God, can I get away from this? So then you say, all right, that's it, I'm going into religion. Right? Religion brings you peace of mind, comfort. No, it doesn't. You come and you say, I've got so much anxiety, I've got so many worries, I have so many burdens, I'm looking for an answer. And what do they tell you? You think you have problems in this life? Wait till you get that. Oh, is it? You need to be saved from what happens up there. You need to do this, and it just piles on. More needs. What do? Where do you go? That's what Judaism is. You know what Judaism actually says? In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Did you hear that? Did you hear that? What a relief. I thought I had. From all these rules and regulations, you have to. It felt like I had created the world and it was all my fault. It's not. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Relax. What's your problem? He's got problems. He created a world and it just doesn't cooperate. In the beginning means before you had any needs. Before there was you and before you had needs, He created the world. So who has needs? You? You didn't even ask to be born. So if your child says, I didn't ask to be born, this is a wise, mature insight into reality. Don't get nervous about it. Agree with him. We don't ask to be born. And if we don't ask to be born, how is it that it's my responsibility? I have to, I must. No. The creator of the world has a need. We don't. In fact, all the needs we do have are not ours. I need to eat. I need to eat. I need to stop eating, and I can't. I don't know if you have this problem, but it's pretty common. I need to eat? It was not my idea. If I designed myself, I would have a more efficient existence that doesn't need to eat. So why do I need to eat? I don't know. It's not my idea. God created me with a need to eat. So really, He needs me to eat. I don't. That's Judaism. This is not religion. This is simply a realization of where we fit in. We didn't create the world, and therefore we don't have needs. The Creator created the world, and He has a valid need. And amazingly, the fulfillment of His need depends on us. That's amazing. So what is a mitzvah? A mitzvah means God depends on you to do what He needs done. So on the one hand, it's such a relief. It's so liberating. My problem? I don't have any problems. My needs? They're not mine. Makes our burdens so much lighter. And on the other hand, I can do for Him. Every minute of the day there is something I can do for Him. And once I get to heaven, I won't be able to do that. Well, then I'm staying here. Leave me here so that I can do for you. So the compliment, the significance that gives us, you can fulfill His need. And on the other hand, they're not your needs. Isn't that amazing? That's Judaism. The problem with religion, besides starting wars, it burdens you, and it puts you at the center of the universe. You have needs. God is only here to help you with your needs. He's your valet. He's your butler, or your savior, or your healer, or your lover, or your protector. But He's busy full-time taking care of you. You are the center of the world. This is not Judaism, and it's not healthy. Serve God with joy. Does that make sense now? If you're trying to be religious, there will be no joy. You get the impression that a person who's religious doesn't know how to smile? Aside from Chabad, Chabad doesn't fit any of the images, but as a default position, if you're really religious, you're very serious, borderline depressed. Doesn't it seem that way? How can you be religious and happy at the same time? Something's wrong. You see somebody happy, you know they sinned. Because if you don't sin, what are you happy about? That's religious. We are not religious. We're not good at it. We never agreed to be religious. We agreed to serve Him. Serve Him means do what He needs. That's a pleasure. That's inspiring. That's uplifting. I can do for you, that is much better than doing for myself. I had this couple, marriage counseling. They were brilliant in their evil. I mean, I've heard people cut each other down, Most couples who are having trouble become brilliant. But this couple, wow. They were so good at it. They would walk in before they even sat down. Didn't you tell her last week that she shouldn't? Well, she did it again. No, I didn't. It was just week after week. It was hard to listen to. So I came up with a brilliant idea. I said, next week, let's get together at the kosher deli in public. I figured they'll tone it down. We get together at the deli. There are about 20 customers sitting at the tables. It made absolutely no difference. They launched into their attacks and counterattacks. It was as if nobody was in the room. Finally, they're exhausted. And the husband says, I think we have a serious problem here. I said, actually, it's not that serious. He says, really? I said, look, how serious can it be? 20 people here heard all about it. They don't care. Not important to them. I've listened to this for months. I don't care. And you told me your mother doesn't want to hear about it anymore. Your own mother doesn't care. How important can this be? They were quiet for a moment. And then for the first time in months, the wife said, so how are you? Do you see what just happened here? They never asked me how I was because they had a serious problem. They had big needs. When I suggested that maybe it's not so serious and it's not such a, so what else is there to talk about? Oh yeah, how are you? All of a sudden I existed. Do you see what happens? When we relieve ourselves of all these burdens, of all these needs, I must, I have to, I got to, stop it. You don't. You're not the creator. But you can do amazing things for the creator. So lighten up and serve God and be Jewish, not religious. We have to spread this message because God has gotten lost in the shuffle. At best, God is there to serve you. And that can't be. That puts too much burden on me, and I didn't even ask to be born. Right? So, here's your choice in life according to Judaism. It's very simple. Do you prefer to be needy, or would you rather be needed? No brainer. We are needed. Our needs, didn't even ask to be born. So if I don't ask to be born because I don't need to be born, and yet I am born, the natural question is, if I don't need this, who does? You've answered all of life's questions. I don't need this, so who does? I don't need, somebody needs me. That is so much better. So don't get religious. Get godly.
Partner with Rabbi Friedman. Visit itsgoodtoknow.org/support.
along with everything else in life, has changed radically and continues to change, along with the world changing. And so when we look at the ancient writings, we find that dreams used to mean different things way back in the days of the prophets. The meanings changed. The same dream, the same scene, and yet the meaning is different in the Middle Ages, and then in the more recent past, again, they've changed. So we'll try to get a picture of what the dreams have meant and what they possibly mean in our world, in our life today. Let's start with the Bible. The first dream that is described in great detail is the dream that Pharaoh had, or the dream that Joseph had. Pharaoh's dream is described as Pharaoh sleeping, and he had a dream. And in his dream he saw 7 cows, and they were healthy, fat cows, coming out of the Nile, I guess. And then after them, 7 other cows came out of the Nile. And these were very emaciated, unhealthy cows. And the unhealthy cows swallowed the healthy cows, and yet the unhealthy cow continued to look unhealthy, as if they hadn't eaten anything at all. And Pharaoh woke up, and his heart pounded. Something told him that this was not an ordinary dream. So what did he do? He went back to sleep. And he had another dream. And in the second dream, he saw 7 healthy stalks of wheat. And then after that, 7 beaten stalks of wheat grew out of the ground. And the 7 beaten, broken stalks swallowed up the 7 healthy stalks and didn't change. And that was the end of a dream. And when he woke up, he knew that he had to find out what this dream meant. And so he called all of his advisors and his sorcerers and his magicians and so on and so forth. And each one of them interpreted the dream for him, but it didn't calm him. It didn't satisfy him. And then somebody mentioned that there was this man, Yosef, was in a prison, in a dungeon, and they schlepped him out of the dungeon, they cleaned him up, and they brought him to Pharaoh because he had interpreted the dreams of fellow prisoners. He had interpreted them successfully. And so Pharaoh asks him to interpret his dream. And he tells him his dream, and Joseph says to him, what God is about to do, he lets Pharaoh know. And then he interpreted the dream as being 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine, and that the famine will be so bad that the years of plenty will disappear and be swallowed up and not even be noticed. And the reason that the dream is repeated, because it's the same message in both dreams, the reason that the dream is repeated is because God hastens to do this, which means that it begins now. The repetition implies urgency. And therefore, this is what Pharaoh should do. He should store up all the food during the 7 years of plenty, so that during the 7 years of famine, he'll have what to eat. And Pharaoh was very impressed, and he appointed Joseph viceroy of Egypt. That's what people did in those days when they were impressed. If they liked you, you became the viceroy. What is the significant teaching or the significant message that we can get from the story? Number one, that Pharaoh was impressed with Joseph's interpretation, more so than with everybody else's interpretation, not because it was brilliant of him to figure out that there would be 7 good years and 7 bad years. That seems to be rather obvious from the dreams. I mean, 7 healthy cows, 7 unhealthy cows, 7 healthy stalks, 7. So the way the commentaries interpret it, the stalks obviously mean food. I mean, wheat is wheat. And the cows are the animals with which you plow the fields to make the wheat grow. So that it all goes back to food. So when you have healthy cows, it means good food, a lot of food. Unhealthy cows, lack of food. So that couldn't have been the brilliant insight that so impressed Pharaoh. What did impress him was, number one, his statement that what God is about to do, he tells Pharaoh. And number two, that therefore Pharaoh should store up food. Everybody else, the other interpreters of dreams, either predicted the future or described Pharaoh's condition or caught a glimpse of Pharaoh's subconscious, and all of them were probably correct. And yet Pharaoh was not content with those interpretations, because somehow he sensed that there was more to the dream than merely an observation. There are times when a dream is clairvoyant in the sense that it anticipates a coming event. You have a dream, you wake up in the morning, and sure enough, that day, what you saw in your dream happened. That's a premonition. We'll talk about why that happens in a moment. But it is not a lesson, it is not a message. You dream that you're going to see 3 green cars on the highway, and sure enough, you see 3 green cars on the highway. No, so? It's interesting, it's curious. The phenomenon is a very interesting phenomenon, but so Pharaoh didn't like those kinds of interpretations because this dream felt like something more. Somebody told him that he would have 7 daughters and they would die. He would bury his... He says, now, so what should I do? Somehow there was something missing in the interpretation, because the dream was more urgent than that. Why is a dream urgent, is what Pharaoh wanted to know. And it was only when Yosef came along and said, God is trying to teach you how to prevent a disaster. He says, now you're talking. Now I hear a message. Now I'm being taught something. Now I'm learning something. And so he made him the viceroy. So the message that a dream carries, if it is in fact a message dream, is something you need to do. Your grandmother or grandfather appear in your dream, and they say, get out of the house now. Believe them and get out of the house. When there's an urgency to do, that kind of a dream is called a message dream. As soon as we need interpretation, as soon as we need to read symbolism into it, it is not a message dream. That's why when Yosef had his dreams, he dreamt that he and his brothers were out in the fields gathering, making bundles out of the wheat. What is that called? Making sheaves, sheaving. They were sheaving in the fields, and each one of them had their sheaves standing, and the sheaves belonging to the brothers all bowed down to the sheaf belonging to Yosef. So Yosef comes to his brothers, and he tells them the dream. And they got angry at him. They said, what do you think? We're all going to bow to you? Yosef has a second dream where he sees the stars and the sun and the moon, and they're all bowing to him. So what does this Chacham do? He runs and tells his brothers that he had such a dream. So now they're even angrier at him. And they say, you mean your father and mother, in addition to us, are also going to bow to you? And they hated him. Whatever that means. And his father, the Torah says, and his father waited to see. Not a very responsible thing to do. The brothers hate each other, they're fighting, and the father's waiting to see. There's more meaning to it than that. Why did Joseph come with these dreams to his brother? If he felt that the dream meant that they would bow to him, so be patient and wait. What do you have to tell him for? I mean, he wasn't a child. And after the first time, when he saw that they got angry, certainly a second time, he should have known better. And what does it mean that the father, Yaakov, who was the choice, the greatest of the patriarchs, what does it mean he waited to see? Didn't he have anything more, a little more committal to do? I mean, something a little more specific? The reason Yosef came to his brothers with the dream is because the dream didn't tell him anything. It's not that he interpreted the dream to mean that his brothers will bow to him. So what? Why is he being told this in a dream? Of what value is that information? So he wasn't content. He didn't have an interpretation of the dream. He came to his brothers so that they would interpret it for him. And to his shock, they interpreted it to mean that they will bow to him. Never occurred to Yosef that that's what the dream meant. And even after they interpreted it that way, he didn't buy it. What's the message? So what should I do? There was no message. So he dismissed it as an insignificant dream. The second time that he had a dream, again he came to them for them to interpret, hoping that there would be some message in it. And they again said, it means that even your mother and father will bow to you. So what kind of dream is this? Who needs this? In fact, there are fasts that are proclaimed when a person has these kinds of dreams and he doesn't want to have them because they're a nuisance. They don't tell you anything, and yet they disrupt your life. So Yosef came to his brothers for an interpretation because the dream did not directly tell him to do anything, and that kind of a dream he wasn't happy with. So dreams, when they have a specific instruction, might be a message, either from a grandparent or from a parent who has already passed away, or from some other saint or tzaddik. But if there is no specific message, then the best thing to do is simply disregard the dream. We know from experience, from recorded experiences, that if the dream is a message, you will have it a second time, like with Pharaoh. If the dream means to get you to do something, it will get you to do that thing, even if it has to happen 3 or 4 or 5 times. So if you have a dream and you think it's telling you to do something, do what Pharaoh did. Go back to sleep. If the dream is meant to get you to do something, it will. It will. You don't have to worry about it. In fact, in some holistic medicine writings, we find cures, remedies for dreams that are clairvoyant, which would mean that certain dreams that are predicting the future, that anticipate the future, which are annoying, can be cured with medicine. If it can be cured with medicine, it is not a prophetic dream. Prophecies do not respond to medication. In fact, just as there is a mental state where people, while awake, imagine certain connections and certain similarities and symbols in what they see, and they interpret that to be some kind of a message from above, and there are voices speaking to them, and there are symbols being shown to them, and it's simply an irritation of the mind. If that can happen when we're awake, it can certainly happen while we're asleep. So dreams that seem to have all sorts of associations and combinations may simply be a restless sleep because the mind doesn't rest, doesn't sleep. You look at the ancient writings, and they've got pages and pages of symbolisms in dreams. Now, some of these are very similar to Freudian interpretation, although they were written 800 or 900 years before Freud. The head, the kidneys in a dream represent the dreamer, the person himself. The shoulders represent the wife and the sisters. The extremities represent children, sons and daughters. The arms, specifically, represent friends, family, servants. The hand itself represents wisdom. So that if you dream about your kidneys, there's a whole thing on metals. See, you have a dream, for example, and you dream that you're going over a cliff in a car. Now here's where dream interpretation becomes complicated. When you dream that you're about to die, it says in the ancient writings that that's a very good sign. Huh? It's a good sign. It's a sign of long life. In fact, we're also told that if a rumor somehow gets started that a certain person died, then you know that that person will live long. So on the one hand, there's the connotation of long life because you're seeing yourself die. And in a dream, it's reversed. If you see yourself die, that means that it's taken care of in the dream, and in real life, you'll live. Same thing with if you see yourself being pursued by an animal, it's a good sign. If you see yourself sick, it's a good sign because it's taken care of in the dream and then you don't have to experience it in real life. In fact, the commentaries say that good people always have bad dreams. Bad people always have good dreams. And that's why there's a custom that if someone tells you their dream, you're supposed to say to them, a good dream you saw. And that's for two reasons. First of all, as with Yosef, a dream that doesn't have a specific message means what you interpret it to mean. And so if you interpret it as a good dream, it'll be a good dream. You interpret it as a bad dream, it'll be a bad dream. That's one reason. The other reason is, it doesn't mean you saw a good dream. It means you saw the dream of a good person. And the dream of a good person is always bad. So if it was a bad dream, somebody comes to you, I had a terrible dream last night, you say, well, that's the dream of a good person. Because good people have bad dreams. And the reason for that is because in the dream, things are reversed. What happens in the dream need not happen in real life. In fact, psychology tells us the same thing. That when you sleep, you can experience in your dream those things that you're afraid to experience while you're awake. And so you get it out of your system, you take care of it in the dream, and then you don't have to worry about it in real life while awake. And the same thing with a bad dream. The good person who has a bad dream and he worries about it, that worry already makes up for whatever else had to happen. For the worry itself, he's already forgiven and his slate is cleaned, and that's it. A bad person wakes up, he had a good dream, he feels good about himself, he's in trouble. So there's the inversion of the dream. But, like I started saying, you see a car going over a cliff. So on the one hand, you see yourself about to die. You never actually see yourself die, but about to die, and that's a good sign. But then you have to take into consideration the metal. The car is made out of metal. And then there's a whole list of what kind of metals and what they mean in your dream. Then, if the car falls into water, well, that's a whole other subject now, because water is very symbolic in dreams, and there's a whole chapter on water. If you fall into the water, you come out of the water, you go down and don't come up, you go down and come up, you see yourself drowning, you're afraid of drowning, the water is cold. All of these things have a meaning. So if somebody comes along and says, I dreamt that I fell over a cliff in my car into cold water, it's a very complicated interpretation. You got to figure out what the metal means, you got to figure out what the water means, you got to figure out what the death means, and so on. What is it about dreams in the first place that makes them so fantastic and so fascinating? The soul that keeps us alive and with which we behave during the day is made up of 5 parts. There are 5 levels to the soul. There's one part of the soul with which we are in contact all the time. That's called nefesh. Without that, we simply are not alive. Nefesh. There's another part of the soul with which we function. A person who can't function but is still alive, his nefesh is active within him, but the other parts of his soul are blocked. They can't get through because the body is not receptive, because the limbs are damaged, the nerves, whatever. God forbid these things happen. And then higher and higher, the different parts of the soul produce different abilities within the person. The higher the soul, the less restricted it is to time and space. So that our nefesh, the nefesh part of our soul, is very limited, and it experiences and is conscious only of its own 5 senses. That's what gives me an identity. If I experience what you were experiencing in your senses, I would be very confused as to who I am. So because I experience only my senses, I see only what I see, and I feel only what I feel, and I hear only what I hear, that's why I am me and not you. But the higher we go in these 5 levels of the soul, the more open-ended they are. So that, for example, a person who is truly a tzaddik, a truly godly person, meaning that the other parts of his soul are active within him on a daily level, on a constant basis, that person does not, in the first place, have the restrictions that most of us have. And therefore they will have premonitions, and they will have intuition, and they will have clairvoyant visions, and they will simply know what tomorrow is all about. And this to them is not surprising, unusual, or uncomfortable. That's the level on which they exist, because their soul is active within them without being restricted within them. So it's almost like the soul is kind of a periscope. It can see what our eyes can't see. And not only ahead in space, but also ahead in time, because they come together. If all 5 levels of the soul are available to the person, then he is a prophet, a true prophet. God speaks through him. If there are only 4 levels of the soul, then he will see visions of prophecy. God sends messages through him. If he has only 3 parts of the soul, then he may be clairvoyant, he may get glimpses of the future or of the past, but there is no message to the world coming through him, maybe not even to himself. If he has only 2 parts of the soul, he may see something in his dream. Because when the person goes to sleep, he releases his soul from the restrictions of the conscious function. So that when you're sleeping, many things can happen that your conscious mind would not permit when you're awake. And this can be good or it can be bad. For example, the bad stuff. In a dream, you can believe ridiculous things. You know, in your dream, you know that there is no one under your bed. You know it. And you tell yourself, silly. No. And yet you are frightened because there is something under your bed. And in your dream, you're talking to yourself and you're saying, "Nah, don't be silly, there's nothing under the bed." And yet your heart is pounding and you're having a nightmare. How can it be that you know there's nothing under the bed and yet you're frightened by that nothing? That's a dream. In a dream, the rules of logic don't apply. You can also imagine things that you know are impossible, like an elephant going through the eye of a needle. You would never imagine it while you're awake. If you thought you saw an elephant going through the eye of a needle, you'd worry about your mental state. But in a dream, it's normal. Something is there and yet it's not there. It's big but it's small. It's bigger than the other thing but it's enveloped in the smaller thing, and these kinds of contradictions. Because the soul is released from the restrictions of the conscious mind. By the same token, it can also perceive things that are true and good, which the conscious mind blocks out. And so it is normal for the soul, when you're asleep, to see either past or future, or come up with insights into a subject you've been studying which you could not come up with while you're awake. And that's why people who study a subject diligently will go to sleep not understanding the subject, and they will wake up and they have the answer. The answer came to them while they were asleep. It's not only that the mind is refreshed and you can approach the subject with a clear mind. You wake up knowing an answer. You know it because it came to you in your sleep. The person who studies Torah diligently is rewarded, so to speak, with lessons. While he's sleeping, he is being taught Torah. Someone once said he needed something. He needed advice from a tzaddik, and the tzaddik was sleeping. And they said, "Well, we'll go wake him. It's urgent." He said, "Never mind. It's not as important as what he's probably learning right now in his sleep." What about nightmares? And here we get closer to our time. To some degree, our dreams reflect the thoughts that we dwell on during the day. Not that you will think about animals in your sleep if you thought about them while you're awake. It's not always that closely related. But the nature of your dreams reflect the nature of your thoughts. So that if you think pessimistically, your dreams will be negative. Not on the same subject necessarily, but in some way they will be negative because your thoughts are pessimistic. If you're very optimistic, your dreams will be optimistic. So we're taught that when we want to evaluate our moral condition, and every lesson, every speech, every time we get together, there has to be a moral lesson. Not just a curiosity subject and academic acrobatics. There has to be a lesson. What are we going to gain from this conversation? So we're told that in trying to evaluate our moral status, and moral status means godly status, are we godlike or have we lost our godly image? How do we know? Obviously, you can look at your behavior, but sometimes that can be tricky. A person can behave well and yet inside be corrupt, selfish. One of the things we look at in order to determine our moral condition is the nature of our dreams. Not the message of the dream, the nature of it. Are they meaningful dreams? Not prophetic, just meaningful. Are they intelligent? Do your dreams contain intelligent subjects? Are they pleasant? Are they friendly? Are they inspiring? Or are they the opposite? And what the Zohar tells us, the Kabbalah, when the person goes to sleep, the soul rises and returns to its natural habitat, and there it is refreshed, ready to come back for another day of struggling with the body. What does it mean that the soul rises? If you're engaged in a struggle with your children, let's say. Oh, that was last week's topic. If you're engaged in a struggle with the children, it wears you out. It's tiring. It's exhausting. How do you refresh yourself? Very simply, you turn inward. You don't have to go anywhere physically. You have to go back into yourself. Go back into yourself, again, doesn't mean anything mystical. It means simply pay attention to yourself. The books say, the articles say, do something nice for yourself. Take a nice, luxurious bath. That might help. But do something nice for yourself could also be a little bit more meaningful. Improve your own morality. You've been trying to get your kid to be a mensch, and that's exhausting. Get yourself to be a mensch. That's easier. It's refreshing. That's what the soul does when we go to sleep. During the waking hours, the soul wrestles with the body. When it goes to sleep, it does its own searching. It does its own soulful thing. And that refreshes it. It doesn't go on vacation. It doesn't retire for the night. It does what a soul naturally does, and that is more refreshing than doing nothing. That's why we find that when a Jew gets back into Jewish activities, another mitzvah, he feels refreshed, not exhausted, because he's back in his element. And that is more refreshing than a vacation. It's more relaxing than doing nothing. So the soul doesn't go to sleep. The body has to rest, but the soul goes back to doing what souls would ordinarily do were it not stuck in a body. Now, if during the day we were living a more godly life, then when we go to sleep, the soul quickly and easily detaches from its efforts with the body and reverts back to itself. Then it has pleasant experience, and that is reflected in the pleasantness of the dream. It has a meaningful experience, and that is reflected in the meaningfulness of the dream. But if during the day the hassle that the soul had with the body was so involved, it was so complicated, that it drags the soul down to where even when the body is asleep, it's hard to untangle itself from the body. So what happens is that the soul withdraws, retreats to some place between body and soul, and it gets stuck in the middle. And when that happens, you have nightmares. You have meaningless dreams. You have negative dreams, because the soul is aggravated. It's stuck. It's neither here nor there. In the same way, say if you have a problem at the office, and finally the day is over, and you take a deep breath, you close the attaché case, and you turn the lights off in the office, and you feel better already. Because now you're free. You're yourself again. But that's only if you had a normal day at the office. If you had a messy day at the office, then even when the attaché case is closed and the lights are off and you're on your way home, nothing goes right. Then the traffic is bad, the weather is bad, the radio goes on the blink, nothing goes right because you're taking home with you this negative feeling that doesn't allow you to leave your work at the office and come home and be yourself. So you're stuck in between. You're not really at work, so you don't feel productive, and you come home and you cause misery in the family because you're in a rotten mood. You can't be home either, so you're neither here nor there, and it is in fact a nightmare. Only then it's a nightmare not only for you, for the family, for the children, for the neighbors, for the building. So the moral of the story is this. The nature of our dreams today generally are not prophetic. I think it's safe to say. They're not even messages. If they were, you would know it and you would do something. What they are, most likely, and in most cases, are a reflection of our moral status. If the dreams are pleasant and positive, then we're doing something right during the day. If our dreams are negative, empty, meaningless, and annoying, disturbing, they're not premonitions of terrible things going to happen. They're simply a reflection of a discomfort and irritation in our waking life. Therefore, the practical thing to do after a negative dream is to simply improve the quality of our life. If we do that, then the dream has served a purpose, and that itself already feels better. It served a purpose. One of the reasons that bad dreams happen to good people is because when good people have a bad dream, they become better. When bad people have a bad dream, they become worse. So God doesn't give them bad dreams. He doesn't want to make them worse. This is the meaning of the dream. One more thought. Exile is called a dream. When Mashiach comes, the Torah says, it will be like waking up from a dream. We will realize that we had been dreaming. Hayinu kechelmen. We will suddenly wake up and realize that what had happened before was a dream. Again, how is exile a dream? Because in exile, particularly when it's lasted 2,000 years, strange combinations, contradictory things can coexist side by side, and we don't even raise an eyebrow. A person can study Torah all his life, or he can be a preacher all his life, and he can talk in the name of God, and think in the name of God, and study the Word of God, and so on and so forth, and at the very same time be doing something God doesn't want him to do. The example of the guy is about to break into a house. He wants to rob the house. But he knows that success comes from God. So he prays for success. And he doesn't see a contradiction. He asks God to give him success in his burglary. One moment we're feeling moral and positive and good, and we're ready to do the mitzvah, and we do the mitzvah, and the next minute it's as if we never did it. And the same, of course, in reverse. We can be evil, truly, genuinely evil one day, and the next day, as if nothing ever happened, turn around and be good. And be really good. A couple of years ago, that would have been called hypocrisy. Today, if we call it hypocrisy, it doesn't mean anything. Because if that's hypocrisy, then we're all hypocrites. So the word has lost its meaning. It's more than hypocrisy. It's a dream in which contradictory things can coexist and not feel uncomfortable, not feel wrong. And that gives us a great opportunity. It's possible for a good person to go bad with no great reason, without any traumatic event, simply because it's a dream. But then again, it also gives a bad person the ability to become good without great trauma. You don't have to be the great Baal Tshuva and fast 6 days a week and cry every morning for forgiveness. You can become good simply by deciding to. How is it possible? After not keeping certain mitzvahs for so many years, how can you just turn around and start keeping the mitzvah? After not being a moral person for so many years, how can you simply turn around and become moral? Won't it feel hypocritical? It doesn't matter. We're dreaming. And we have to take advantage of the dream. It permits us to become good for no reason at all, and with no preparation at all. We need no excuses. I was bad yesterday, so what? Today's different. That's hypocrisy? No, it isn't. I'm dreaming. And that's what's going to happen when Mashiach comes. If we look around and we say, look at how many people still need to change their opinions and to change their lifestyle in order to be ready for Mashiach. So how can we really believe that Mashiach is coming today? Isn't it going to take time to convince all these people? And the answer is not in a dream. In a dream, nothing takes time. In a dream, you don't have to follow a logical sequence. The bad can be over and the good begins in a second. And so Mashiach can come in a second. And that's the reality of our condition. When Mashiach comes, we wake up and we realize we've been dreaming. So the state of the dream invites us to simply make new resolutions, take on radically better habits and lifestyle and so on, begin to observe a new mitzvah, and you don't need excuses. You don't need to read up on the subject. You don't need to become a master of philosophy or theology. You can simply allow yourself to be as good as anyone has ever been. It doesn't matter what you were until this very moment. The same is true with a birthday, and today happens to be my birthday. So the Rebbe wants us to celebrate our birthdays publicly, which is a new custom. Usually, birthdays were celebrated through introspection and a little bit of isolation and contemplation, reflection on the past year and the coming year and so on. But recently the Rebbe has said that we have to celebrate our birthdays publicly, we have to make a big tumult about it, a lot of noise about it, and share our resolutions, because on the day of the birthday, it says in Kabbalah that a greater amount of your soul is accessible to you on that day than on other days. And therefore, what you want to accomplish and what you resolve to do will be more effective and more successful on the day of your birthday than any other day. So when we have a combination of a dream and a birthday, then we can do anything. We can really become radically better. And without any strain, without any effort, simply by deciding to take advantage of this free-for-all that is presented to us in this world before Mashiach comes. If you want to be good, you can. The instructions are there. The opportunity is there. The preparations are unnecessary. And in a moment, we can turn ourselves, our community, and our world into a godly place. We can turn it into a wonderful place, even though a moment ago it seemed to be dark and doomed and hopeless. So I invite you to share in the spirit of the birthday and to take advantage of the dreams to make radical steps, to simply turn around and surprise everyone who knows you by becoming better. It'll feel funny. People will be unbelieving, particularly yourself. And you say, no, it's not me, it's not me. Who was this actor a while ago who grew a beard, wore the beard for a while, then took it off? And he said he couldn't stand it. It made him feel too dignified. Couldn't tolerate, couldn't see himself being dignified. So our self-image limits us sometimes, and we can't believe ourselves being so good. But in a dream, you can believe it. You can believe it. And it's true. It's genuine. It's for real. The goodness is for real. And so, following the advice of how to celebrate a birthday, contemplate and dwell on yourself. What does that mean? Simple. Think about what you could be. Then think about what you ought to be. And then think about what you are. If that doesn't make you become better, it will. It's very simple. And in our days of Gullus, everything is simple. We can easily become bad, and we can just as easily become good. Now is it very hot? Like extremely hot. If we open those windows, you'll be cold. Okay, I have no solutions. Can we open the door? Anybody want to tell us about their dreams? Some interesting dreams?
What about Holocaust dreams? I've had many dreams of being chased by Germans, and I hear that to be a common thing amongst Jewish friends. They've had dreams. Particularly, I heard it from 3 people this week with Kristen.
There's a lot of controversy about that, a lot of talk about that. People who had never been to a concentration camp will have dreams with such precise details, accurate details of a given concentration camp. My guess, this is not written anywhere, my guess is that, again, we're dealing with either positive dreams or negative dreams. For obvious reasons, negative dreams in our generation is dreams of holocausts. Because that's the negativity of our generation, the evil of our generation. And possibly in the Middle Ages, when people had dreams that were negative, it was about dragons or vampires. Because for some reason, evil expressed itself in those forms in those days. Evil expresses itself in Holocaust today. Which doesn't mean that the person who has that dream had any relationship to the Holocaust in reality. It means, rather, that the Holocaust was not a one-time event. The Holocaust is the personification of the evil of our generation. So that if you have an evil dream, it will be about a Holocaust, even if you never heard of the Holocaust. So I guess, in a sense, the Holocaust goes on. The evil goes on. Only now it's safely tucked away in dreams, where it belongs. And again, bad dreams happen to good people. Yes?
I have a question about bad dreams happen to good people, good dreams happen to bad people, and then you said if you're a positive person, you have a positive dream. If you're a negative person, you have a negative dream. I think there's a contradiction there.
If your dreams are consistently negative,
Okay.
it's telling you something about yourself. If your dreams are consistently positive, and yet you have a bad dream, that's a bad dream happening to a good person. In other words, the bad dream should be an exception. It should be an event, not a nightly experience. Yeah.
Well, assuming we all have dreams, what about people who very rarely do?
We all dream. The question is whether we remember them, whether we're conscious of them when we wake up. Again, just guessing now, I would say that unless the dream has a very important message or is very positive and inspiring, you're better off not remembering it. So don't worry about it. Yeah.
I had a dream that my former husband started drinking again and using drugs, and he's an alcoholic. He's got in trouble from it in the past several times due to his attitude, which the drinking brings it out and he gets in trouble. And then I had a dream that he got out of prison. He went to prison this time, and after he got out of prison, it was about 4 months he had to spend in there, and I was waiting for him afterwards, and we got back together.
You mean that when you dreamt that he was getting back into trouble, he actually did?
It was due to his drinking again.
Right.
Right now, he's recovering again.
Okay. Did you dream about his coming out of prison also before it happened?
No, I dreamt that he learned his lesson through going to prison. He came to know God more in a personal relationship. And then we got back together afterwards.
Okay. Again, when a person's sleeping, the soul is not as restricted as it is when you're awake. And therefore, time and space do not interfere. So that in a dream, you can dream about something happening to your mother, although she's on the other side of the world, and it's probably happening. Or you can have a dream about a close friend, and it's probably happening, or a child, or a husband, a wife. Again, the nature of the dream is important. If you dream only that he's in trouble again, that would tell you the nature of your relationship. You are very closely bounded to each other, but what bonds you is negativity. That's how you relate when you're together, and that's what you clairvoyantly sense when you're apart. If you also have premonitions in your dream about his becoming healthier again, then that's an indication that your relationship is a healthy relationship and that what bonds you is good news, not only bad news. And when you have both, it means that you have a thorough bond. You're connected on both levels so that if something bad happens, you'll feel it. If something good happens, you'll feel it.
I also had another dream recently that, my sister and I are not talking, but that her husband got up from the dinner table and had a heart attack suddenly, and she was not prepared for it, and he died. And I was very disturbed about it. And so I called her and notified her to ask her just to let her know to be prepared. And she said, I don't know. I can never be prepared for such things, but we have talked about it.
And it hasn't happened.
Not yet.
Probably won't. Probably won't. It's a good dream.
Why would a good person relive an unpleasant real-life experience
In dreams?
in the dream over and over again?
Well, because something that experience was supposed to accomplish is not finished. And again, referring to any dream, by the way, if you have a dream that makes you uncomfortable, or if you're having many dreams and you'd rather not, one of the things to do is to give charity in the amount of a meal, whatever it would cost you to eat a meal. Give that amount of charity with the intention, asking God to please take away the dreams. Whether they're recurring dreams or a one-time dream, but charity is the antidote to bad premonitions and stuff like that. So maybe the dream is simply meant to get you to do another mitzvah. And if you give the tzedakah, that'll be the mitzvah, and you'll be finished with it. Try it. No money back guarantee.
Does God have dreams?
He has nightmares. I don't know if God has dreams. I think when we have dreams, we're a little bit closer to God, a little closer to truth. Does that mean that God has dreams? I suppose if we can dream, he can certainly dream. Anything we can do, he can do better. But I don't know. Nightmares he has. Nightmares. A lot of nightmares. Yeah. Sleeplessness, yeah, we keep him awake. It's 11 o'clock, we're not home, he worries. I mean that literally. The 11th hour, it's like time, and it's hard for him to wait as it is for us. Yeah.
I want to know if, I have a lot of times dreamed that I can see something is happening, and then in 5, 6, or a week, a month later, that thing will happen. And I'm not sure I'm a good person on that level, so I can see it. So I have the whole levels and so.
Now, what I'm saying is that a tzaddik will see it when he's awake. What you see in a dream that might come true 5 weeks later, the tzaddik sees while he's awake.
So what's...
Because his neshama is not restricted the way ours is. Because our neshama is restricted, the only time we get a glimpse of anything besides the immediate present is when we're sleeping, in dreams. But again, I wouldn't attribute too much significance to something happening that you dreamt about 5 weeks ago, because almost anything you dream about will happen within 5 or 6 weeks, unless it's weird. But any normal event is a normal event. Sooner or later, it's going to happen. So it's more the kind of a dream that you want to go to somebody and say, "Is there any meaning to this?" Because it doesn't seem to have.
Well, it was once was like I had a dream that that my father was in an accident. That I woke up, I called in the morning.
TorahCafe.com.
Okay, so the first thing we need to do, so let's get a little bit of a bird's eye view of the Torah itself. It's broken into 5 books, and you have to wonder why. So if we look at just the titles, the names of the 5 books, we get to see an interesting thing. In English or Latin or Greek or whatever it is, the first book of Torah is called Genesis. But Genesis means the beginning, the origins. The word Bereshis, the Hebrew name for the book, Bereshis, in the beginning, emphasizes that it is not the beginning. It's early on, but it is not the beginning. So that translation is a bit misleading. In the beginning means that the plan itself, the origins of the world, is a plan, not an act of creation. So before you actually do creation, you first have to have a vision, a blueprint, a plan. And it's the vision that is the beginning of creation. And early on in that vision, God said, "Let there be light." But saying, "Let there be light," or even creating the earth, that's not the beginning. It doesn't start with creation. I mean, literally, it starts with creator, not with creation. So where does creation happen within God? When he actually creates? No, it must have its origins in a more embryonic state. So the real origin, the real beginning, the true genesis of creation is God's desire, which produced a plan, which produced a vision, which produced the actual making of the world. So there's one plan, and that is God wants a dwelling place in the lowest world. That was the vision. That you create all the worlds down to the lowest, where you can go no further, and then elevate that to become one with him and complete the circle, and everything becomes one. So ultimately, God is about oneness. Now, the first project in any true creation, or the first step in any project, is who you're working with. Who are you working with? God's plan is that the world should become a dwelling place for him. Well, who's going to do it? What's your cast of characters? Who's your staff? The first book of the Torah is just cast of characters. That's what it is. It introduces you to Adam and Chava, to Noach, to Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and they go down to Egypt, and that's where it ends. So basically what we're told is there is a people There's a chain. It starts with Avraham. It finishes with the tribes, the 12 tribes who make up the Jewish people. Now you know who is responsible for making the world a dwelling place for God. End of project 1. And so the book ends. The next book is really the next project. What's the next step? Now what? You know who's going to do it? What do you need to know now? The next step is where? Location. Where is this dwelling place going to be? In the lowest world, but in what part of the lowest world? Where in the lowest world? Some people feel, some religions believe, God exists in your mind, in your heart, in your faith, in your higher faculties. He's experienced only as a religious experience, as a spiritual event. The physical world is the enemy. It encumbers you, it limits you, it drags you into all sorts of unholy stuff. God is not there. If you want God, you sit on a mountaintop, you meditate, and you find God. The second book of Torah says that's not where it happens. Because the second book of Torah primarily describes the construction of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, in painstaking detail. Made out of wood, made out of gold, made out of copper. You make it this size, a cubit and a half. Very physical stuff. And that's where God dwells. This is his tabernacle, his meeting place. The rest of the book, of the second book, is practical laws, civil, social necessities, how to run a civilized society. There's nothing mystical in this book. And even the event at Sinai, God comes down and speaks to the people, that's kind of mystical. But the emphasis is God came down. We didn't go up. God came down to Mount Sinai. The whole emphasis of this book is focus on the lowest, the most physical, the most material part of the world. That's where God is going to dwell. You make tefillin out of leather, not out of good intentions. You make matzah out of flour, not out of faith. Not out of faith. And that's why the name, in Latin it's called Exodus. Why? Because one of the stories, or maybe the first story, in the book is about the Exodus. All right. If you were going to name it after some significant event, it should be called Mount Sinai. Because the whole point of the Exodus was to get to Mount Sinai and receive the 10 Commandments. So the book should be called Sinai. 10 Commandments. But the name of the book is not just the name of this parsha. It's the whole book. In Hebrew, the name of the second book is Shmos, which means names. Now that's a strange title, because the book begins with an account of who was in Egypt and who were the children and the names of the children of Israel. Names are given when the soul comes down into a body. Souls in heaven have no names. In fact, when Jacob was wrestling with the angel and he said, "What's your name?" And he said, "What are you asking? We don't have names. We don't go by names up in heaven." So the souls that are even greater and higher than angels certainly don't have names. The name is useful when the soul comes into a body and you need to connect the soul to the body. There needs to be some channel of flow of energy and of communication between the soul and the body. The name facilitates that connection. And that's why when a person needs a blessing for health, the blessing, the Mishaberach, is made with the name and the mother's name. The name is your channel for connection to your soul. So what does this mean? The second book of Torah is about names. It's not about souls in heaven. It's about souls when they come down into a body, which is when names become relevant. So briefly, the whole book of Shmos, which is the second book, is about where in your home, in your possessions, in your physical life, in your physical activities, in your food. So when people say, isn't that strange that God has commandments concerning food, concerning your bed, concerning your clothes, concerning your field and your scales at work? Shouldn't we better not eat, not have work, shops, not make money, live on a mountaintop and disavow all physical, material? No, the exact opposite. When our physical stuff becomes permeated with godliness, now we're fulfilling the whole purpose of creation. We get to the third book, we don't have to go into that. The third book is how. All right, we know who, we know where, now how. The third book of Torah is all about sacrifices. That's why it's called Leviticus. It's the job of the tribe of Levi to be the priests and the kohen and perform the sacrifices. A sacrifice means literally you take a goat or a lamb, you bring it to the temple, you put it up on the mizbeach, on the altar, and it rises and is consumed by the divine fire. You actually see the physical become spiritual or godly. So it's the how. How do you elevate an ordinary goat and turn it into something holy? The fourth book, very briefly, is called Desert, in the desert. In English it's called Numbers. Again, it's not a good translation. In the desert, the fourth book is about when. So the first book is who, the second book is where, the third book is how, the fourth book is when. Because we got to have like an update, a report on how are we doing. Is the world getting any holier? Are we succeeding at all? Very often, well, for most of our history, the world looked like a desert. Nothing's growing. Nothing's happening. We're not making any progress. Here we thought, just as an example, after the Holocaust, there would never be anti-Semitism again. Right. So it's a desert. It's not getting any better. Or so it seems on the surface. The fourth book of Torah says, even when things look like they're deserts, nothing's growing, it's desolate, it's underneath, we're making progress. Every day we're getting closer. It keeps moving, it keeps building and accumulating. The bad stuff burns off after a time. The good lasts forever. Then the fifth book is the conclusion. When we're ready to enter the promised land. In other words, before Mashiach comes, when the plan has been completed, and then we move up to how do you live in a perfected and completed world. So basically what it's saying is there's one Torah, not 5 Torahs. There's one Torah because there's one plan, there's one vision, there's one desire that God has. And it comes in 5 stages, in 5 volumes. Shalom Aleichem. How are you? You know, I do a lot of talking, a lot of Zooming, many classes, many subjects. But that's all formal stuff. Hopefully good stuff, but formal. We also have a Wednesday night meeting that's more informal and kind of Hamish. If you want to join us for that kind of an event, interactive, time for questions and so on. If you want to join us for this side of conversation, click on the link below and join us every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock. Well, maybe not every Wednesday night, but we try to make it every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock, a more informal chat, which can be more enjoyable at times than the formal stuff. So check it out. Click on the link and join us. Try it. You'll like it.